Hello guys, it's me and welcome back to my channel, and if you are new here then welcome. In this video we are going to be talking about the wheel of the year. We're going to talk about the Sabbats, the Esbats, the differences. We're going to talk about the structure of the wheel of the year. We're going to talk about the halves of the year and so much more. So if you guys would like to learn about that, then of course continue on watching. Now before we begin, I do want to point out that I do have my computer right here, and I'm going to be looking quite frequently to my computer because I do want to touch on everything, and I do not want to miss a little single thing. And I also want to point out that this is going to be a two-part video, and of course this is the first part. So with that being said, let's continue. Now to begin, of course, we should define what the wheel of the year is. So what is the wheel of the year, you might ask? The wheel of the year is essentially a wheel-shaped calendar that follows the cyclical journey of the sun throughout the changing of the seasons and the phases of the moon. And as a base symbol, the wheel is represented by this wheel right here, which with each line representing a seasonal festival, which is what we will get into in a little bit. Now, the wheel is composed by two solstices, which are on the top and the bottom, two equinoxes, which is right in the middle, and then the 4 cross-quarter days, which is essentially the midpoints between the solstices and the equinoxes, which is a total of 8 seasonal festivals, which is what we refer to as Sabbats. Now, additionally, the wheel is also composed by 12 to 13 lunar celebrations, which are typically the full moon celebrations, which is what we refer to as Esbats. Now, what are the Sabbats, you might ask? So the Sabbats are essentially the seasonal festivals, as I mentioned before, which is what we sometimes refer to as the solar festivals, and its focus relies on the effects that the sun has on the earth, and therefore the relationship between the god and the goddess. Now, what are Esbats on the other hand, you might ask? So Esbats are, as I mentioned, lunar celebrations that are typically held on when the phase of the moon is full, though they may also be done in other phases as well. Usually it is celebrated as a coven, though it is not limited to being celebrated only as a coven. And Sabbats and Esbats are what are often referred to as ritual observances when you are in a ritual or in a circle setting. Now, going a little bit into detail about the structure of the wheel of the year, the Sabbats are divided into what are called the major and the minor Sabbats. So the major Sabbats are also known as the greater Sabbats, and the minor Sabbats are known as the lesser. So pretty easy to understand. So the major Sabbats consist of the 4 cross-quarter days, so those being Imbolc, Beltane, Lammas, also known as Lunasa, and Samhain. Now, these are the Sabbats that have the Gaelic names, right? Now, by Gaelic, pretty much think of the Celtic, so those are pretty much like Celtic names, right? Now, typically, these Sabbats are celebrated on the night before and on the day of the Sabbat. So, Halloween, you would celebrate it on the 31st of October and November 1st. Same thing goes for the rest of the 4 cross-quarter days, right? Now, these celebrate the changing of the seasons, meaning most specifically nature's fertility. And with that being said, it focuses a lot on the relationship between the sun and the earth. And these Sabbats are what are typically referred to as fire festivals. Now, fire festivals, it pretty much comes from what at least I think. If there's like a better explanation, that surely leave it in the comment section below. But essentially, from what I understand, is that the reason why these are referred to as fire festivals is because of the traditional association with the elements in those Sabbats. So bonfires would be lit on Beltane, then you have lighting candles and fires on Imbolc and Samhain, and then the deities which are associated to that element, such as Bridget in Imbolc, and then you have Lu, as in, Lunasa, in Lammas. Now, in terms of Lu in Lunasa, Lammas, I've noticed that a lot of people say that he's not a sun god, that he is a god of like skills and such. Some people say that he is both. So with that, I do recommend that you do a little bit of research, or if you already have, surely leave it in the comment section below. I would love to read more about that, and if you can provide resources upon the information that you have found, even better. But with that being said, now let's move on to the minor Sabbats, which pretty much consists of the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes. So the minor Sabbats, the lesser Sabbats, pretty much focus on the astronomical solar events, meaning that it follows the journey or the phases of the sun throughout the year. So for example, you have the birth, the ascension, the peak, then you have the descension of the sun, and then the rebirth, right? So it is birthed in Yule, it grows in power, then the peak is in Letha, also known as the summer solstice, it loses its power, and then it becomes reborn back again in Yuletide. Now, this essentially means that the god predominates these Sabbats, though honestly, if I'm being really honest, like, it really depends on your tradition. Some people focus mainly on the god, while others focus on both. It really depends on how you celebrate these Sabbats, and also just the tradition overall that you are currently following. Now, let's talk a little bit more in detail about Sabbats and Esbats. Now, as stated before, the Sabbats focus on the sun's journey and the relationship between both deities. Now, that said, I do want to mention that Sabbats are often associated with the energy of giving and therefore giving back. And Esbats, on the other hand, focus on the phases of the moon, and it is associated with the energy of receiving, therefore asking. Now, the best way that I can explain this is to think about how the god's energy is associated with that is the projective and active aspect of the divine, and then the goddess's energy is essentially associated with that energy that is passive and receptive aspect of the divine, right? And this is also reflected upon the charge of the goddess. Oh my gosh, I can't speak. This is also reflected on the charge of the goddess, which states, "Whenever ye have need of anything once in a month, and better it be when the moon is full, ye shall assemble in some secret place and adore the spirit of me who am queen of all mysteries." So essentially it is pretty much stated there, right, that in every full moon, most specifically, though not limited to, right, you pretty much, like, you know, just ask her for something. And I think that pretty much reinforces the thought that on Esbats you would be asking, while as with the Sabbats you would be giving thanks to, right? Though honestly, you're not limited to, not everybody follows this belief, and it is completely okay if you want to, you know, give thanks on the full moon, or you just want to, like, you know, do a little celebration, not really having any sort of magical working in your mind or whatever. Honestly, it really depends on you and how you celebrate. I just thought it would be really nice to point this out, just in case if you had similar beliefs, or if you wanted to experiment a little bit more in your own Wheel of the Year practice. So yeah, with that being said, let's continue now. We're going to be talking about the light half and the dark half of the Wheel of the Year. So to understand this a little bit better, I think it would be important to mention that the Celts, they actually divided the year between 2 halves. So you have the light half and the dark half. The light half would be between Beltane to Samhain, and then you have the dark half, which would be between Samhain and Beltane. Beltane refers to the beginning of summer, and then, you know, then you have the summer solstice, which is the peak of summer, right? So Beltane would be the beginning of summer, and then you have Samhain, which is summer's end or summer's ending, something like that. I think that's actually what Samhain means. I think it's summer's end, if I'm not mistaken. Do not quote me on that, but I do believe that I am correct. But anyways, that is how the Celts divided the Wheel of the Year. However, they aren't always split between those Sabbats, as a matter of fact, and this is something that was really confusing to me at first to understand, and I read that other traditions actually split the halves between the solstices or the equinoxes. So with that being said, when it comes to the solstices, it would be from Yule in the top, it would be from Yule, or at least if you're in the northern hemisphere, from Yule Talitha would be the light half. Think of how the sun is growing in power. It is born or reborn. It is born and then it grows in power to the peak of power, the light half. And then from the peak of power, it loses its power up until it is pretty much dead. And then it becomes rebirthed once again in Yuletide. Think of how the day is shorter, the night is longer in Yuletide. And then in the summer solstice, it is the opposite. So the day is longer and the night is shorter. I think that's a really easier way to understand. And honestly, this is the way that I understood it. That is the way that I learned it. And it is how it made sense to me. However, on the other hand, some people celebrate follow the halves, I suppose, of the Wheel of the Year is actually by splitting them between the equinoxes. So you have from Ostara to Mabon, it would be considered the light half of the year, and then from Mabon to Ostara, it would be the dark half of the year. This is kind of a little bit complicated to understand, so I'm gonna see if I can like explain it with like, I don't know, a little like drawing, I don't know, or if it makes sense by words, great. If it makes sense by like the thing that I'm about to do, I think, then either way, just if you find a better way to explain it, let me know. But essentially, the way that I understood it was that, the equinoxes, equal. They're both in equal power, right? So let's start with Ostara, right, to Mabon. So Ostara is here, Mabon is here. So essentially, you have how they are, like I said, equal power. So it grows in power, peak of power, loses power, and then they're back at being equal. And then from Mabon to Ostara, again, they're equal. It loses power, it's lost its power, and then it gains it, and then they're both back at equal. Again, it's kind of hard to like explain it in a better way for me, but essentially the best way that I can explain it is like that, or just saying they're both equal. And on the light half, it is the half where the peak of power is going on, and then on the darker half is when it loses its power. You know what I mean? I think that's like an even better way to explain it, but regardless, on another note, I do hope that made sense. Again, if you have a better way to like explain it, leave it in the comment section below. Now, on another note, what's intriguing about the halves, and I'm pretty sure you guys knew that I was going to bring this up, is actually one of the legends that is associated with the halves. So that being the legend of the Holly King and the Oak King. Now, this story tells of an endless battle between both kings in the love and favor of the goddess. Now, while one king reigns, the other one claims defeat. So to give an example, the Holly King pretty much defeats the Oak King. Now, depending on the version of the legend that you read, it may have a plot twist or a different version, of course, yeah. So in this one in particular that I want to mention is that the child of the Holly King is actually the rebirth of the defeated king. With that being said, the Oak King is actually the child of the Holly King, and of course, once that child grows up, he will defeat his father, and essentially the cycle will repeat itself, but with the Oak King having a child, and then that child being the Holly King growing in power, then they battle, and then the Holly King defeats the Oak King, and the cycle repeats pretty much endlessly. Now, when it comes to this story, it's pretty easy to understand that it revolves around the constant battle of power, I guess, of both the father and the son, while others actually tell the story of the resurrection of the other one. So essentially, whichever one is defeated, they actually become like resurrected, so they just come back alive. And typically I've noticed that when it comes to this version, they're both referred to as twins rather than having the relationship of a father and a son. So I thought that would be really interesting to point out. And of course, just as many myths, like I mentioned, and legends and stories and all that good jazz, This one is just one variation of the many, but essentially the symbolism that it holds is still the same. So with that being said, the story is meant to pretty much reflect the sun's waxing and its waning. That basically means that both of the kings represent the solar cycles of light, dark, summer, and winter. So you have the summer being represented by the Oak King, and then you have the winter by the Holly King. However, I do want to point out that not everybody follows or focuses on this particular legend, but I thought it would be I still thought that it would be good to know. So, you know, hence why I mentioned it. Now, on another side note, I do want to point that because the Halves focus on the cycles of fertility, their location within the Wheel of the Year truly depends on your tradition, but primarily it really depends on the region in which you are located in the world. So this overall was essentially what really was confusing to me, and I really didn't understand why in well, not even some places, but rather why some people honored or celebrated or observed, should I say, the light half and the dark half, or both halves, in different Sabbats rather than always doing it in the same ones like Sabbats are in general, you know. And it was really confusing to me because I saw that some people, like I was, well, not really taught, but I learned, was that, like I mentioned, it was divided between the solstices. But I noticed that some people actually celebrated them between Beltane and Samhain, but then you have other people celebrating them or observing it, or observing them, should I keep saying, between the equinoxes. So it was so confusing up until I got in, until I touched upon the information that it really depended on the region in which you pretty much are located in the world. But if you want to go in a more traditional way, I guess you could say it would be pretty much divided between Beltane and Samhain, considering that Beltane pretty much is the beginning of summer, and then you have Samhain, which pretty much means or is the ending of summer. So that would be a more traditional way, though some people, like I mentioned, you know, solstices, equinoxes, whatever makes sense to you in your own practice. Now, at the end of the day, with all of the information that I gave, when it comes to the festivals and celebrations and all of that good jazz, what's important to note is that the goal of celebrating all of that, or all of those, is to do it with love and joy. And I think it's reflected very well within the charge of the goddess. So once again, so the charge of the goddess says, "Let my worship be within the heart that rejoices, for behold, all acts of love and pleasure are my ritual." So essentially, I think that pretty much encompasses how we should be celebrating not just the Sabbats, the Esbats, but also the Sabbats. So I think that you shouldn't focus too much on this, how do I put this? You shouldn't focus too much on being so strict about your own methods of celebrating the celebrations, but rather the fact that you are doing it in a way that is fun, it brings you happy, and in a way that you are expressing that love for what you are doing and for whom you are doing it for. You know, so essentially, in a nutshell, just don't be too hard on yourself. The most important thing is that you are learning, and the fact that you are celebrating it and having fun, and you're doing it out of love, not out of fear or out of, you know, just the fact that you just have to do it, you know? And I think that I will end it on that note. I really do hope that you guys liked the video. And of course, if you guys have comments, if you have anything that you would like to mention or add to what I mentioned, be sure to leave it in the comment section below. I would love to read it. And I would also love it if you guys started a discussion. I do love to read your comments, especially when they add way more information to what I am mentioning right here. And if I got something wrong, or if there's a better way to explain something that I explained here, be sure to leave it as well. I would love for you guys to do that. So with that being said, if you guys liked the video, be sure to leave a like, comment, share, and subscribe. And I shall see you guys later.